2:25 p.m. The flight deck is active, but nothing feels rushed. Jets sit secured and silent, their canopies flashing white beneath the hard midday sun. The deck crew move with the kind of rhythm that comes only from repetition. Yellow shirts signal, red shirts check safety pins, green shirts work low along the catwalks. The wind over the bow is steady, the sea is manageable. Nothing in the sky hints that anything unusual is about to happen. Below deck, inside the Combat Information Center, the radar picture looks routine right up until it doesn't. At 2:25 and 17 seconds, 3 faint returns appear at the far edge of the air search display. Soft, unclear, not civilian, but enough to register. The radar operator says nothing at first. He leans closer, adjusts the gain, and watches. The returns remain. 3 contacts. Fast. No transponder. CIC to bridge, he says evenly. We have 3 high-speed aerial contacts bearing 310, long range. On the bridge, nobody looks shocked. This is not the first time they have heard something like this. But tone matters, and this time, the tone is different. The officer of the deck steps closer to the console. The track data refreshes. Speed is rising. Altitude is dropping. That changes everything. At 2:26 p.m., the contacts tighten formation. This is not random traffic, not a loose crossing. Their vectors align with the carrier's projected path. Not passing by, not skirting around, coming straight in, no identification, no radio calls, no explanation. On the flight deck, a green shirt pauses mid-step, sensing the shift before anyone says it out loud. Then the airboss breaks across the net, clipped and precise. Stand by, hold positions. Below decks, steel doors begin sealing shut. Not slammed, simply secured. The sound rolls through the hull like a low mechanical exhale. Inside CIC, the picture sharpens. The radar now resolves clearer shapes. Fast. Military fast. The tactical action officer watches the timeline shrink. At current speed, closest approach is only minutes away. Bridge, CIC. Contacts accelerating. No IFF response. The captain is already there. He doesn't need to raise his voice. Set condition 3. No explanation follows. None is necessary. Across the ship, the order moves quickly. Condition 3, key stations manned, systems ready, sensors prioritized, logs recording. This is the boundary between routine and serious. At 2:27 p.m., the contacts drop lower again. Now their approach is no longer theoretical. They are entering the altitude band where intent starts to matter. Deck cameras tilt skyward automatically, sending live imagery into CIC. Blue sky, broken cloud. Still nothing visible, but the radar is clear. One of the 3 aircraft shifts position, sliding just ahead of the others and offsetting to the right. A probing move, testing reaction time, testing nerves. The ship does not change course, the ship does not change speed. At 2:28 p.m., the first radio call goes out on guard frequency, calm and professional. Unidentified aircraft approaching U.S. Navy warship, you are operating in international airspace. State your intentions. Silence. No acknowledgement, no carrier tone, only the steady hiss of an open frequency. On deck, a jet blast deflector starts to rise. Not all the way, just enough to be ready. Crew members clear the immediate area in smooth, practice motion. No one runs, no one panics. Inside CIC, passive sensors begin logging emissions. Listening only. The contacts continue closing. At 2:29 p.m., their speed peaks. The lead aircraft descends lower still, settling into a profile that will leave no doubt once it becomes visible. Range is collapsing. CIC reports 3 contacts, tight formation. The captain studies the display without expression. This is not an open strike. Not yet. But it is far from normal. Everything about the approach signals pressure without commitment, intent without crossing the final line. A move designed to force a response. The ship gives them none. At 2:30 p.m., the aircraft are close enough that the deck crew feel the change in the air before they see anything. A faint vibration, a shift in wind. Still no weapons indication, no radar lock, just speed and purpose. The captain breaks the silence. Log everything. In CIC, timestamps roll. Bearing, speed, altitude, every second marked. Whatever this becomes, it is no longer invisible. The test has begun. By 2:32 p.m., the air picture tightens further. Passive systems finish separating background noise from the signal, and the uncertainty disappears. The contacts resolve into military profiles, fast movers with signatures that do not belong to civilian traffic. The classification returns clean, Russian. 3 warplanes, disciplined spacing, no transponders, no cooperative identification, not lost, not wandering, exactly where they intend to be. The tactical action officer gives a small nod. The information moves to the bridge without unnecessary commentary. The captain already understands what it means. At 2:33 p.m., the formation adjusts. The lead aircraft drops lower, peeling slightly off axis and angling toward the carrier's bow. The other two hold back, wide enough to observe, close enough to support. This is not a casual pass. It is a setup. Bridge, CIC. Contacts confirmed as Russian military aircraft. Altitude decreasing. Lead contact maneuvering aggressively. On the flight deck, personnel clear exposed positions. Not because anyone has told them to lose composure, but because they know the geometry. Low-fast aircraft rewrite the margins in seconds. A second radio call goes out, crisp and formal. Russian military aircraft, this is a United States Navy warship operating in international airspace. Maintain safe separation. The frequency stays open. No reply. At 2:34 p.m., the lead aircraft commits. It drops below 500 feet, nose lowered just enough to build speed, then lines up across the carrier's projected path. On deck, heads tilt upward. Sunglasses catch the glare. Someone mutters under their breath, then goes quiet. The jet tears past the bow at low altitude, crossing the ship's axis with deliberate precision. Close enough to feel, close enough to erase any doubt. The sound hits a heartbeat later, raw engine thunder ripping across steel and sea. Loose gear rattles, wind slams across the deck in a violent burst. Inside CIC, nobody flinches. The radar trace spikes, then steadies. The aircraft pulls up and banks away to rejoin the others. This is the moment they have been waiting for. Weapon status remains unchanged. No fire control signal, no direct engagement cue, but something else lights up on the board. ESM confirms track mode, the electronic warfare officer says. Not a lock, but they are painting us. That matters. Track mode means measurement, pressure, observation. They want to see how the ship reacts. At 2:36 p.m., the second aircraft moves forward, echoing the first pass, though higher and wider. Different angle, different look. The carrier still does not turn. It still does not accelerate. On the bridge, the captain stands with his hands folded behind his back, watching the feed. This is not about theater. It is about control. Even the lack of reaction is part of the exchange now. Down in CIC, the timeline compresses once more. The Russians are not finished. At 2:37 p.m., the third aircraft descends just enough to come clearly into visual range, then holds steady. No dramatic sweep, no showmanship, just presence. 3 aircraft now bracket the carrier's airspace without technically crossing into it. A textbook pressure maneuver. Close enough to provoke, careful enough to deny. Range steady, no weapons observed. Another radio hail goes out. Same words, same tone, same silence in return. The deck crew watch the sky for a moment, then look away. They know that staring upward changes nothing. What matters is below decks now, in sensors, logs, timing, and restraint. At 2:38 p.m., the lead aircraft climbs sharply, then eases throttle just enough to stretch the moment. It wants a response. A launch, a scramble, a move, it can point to later. It gets nothing. Instead, the ship records everything. Every pulse of radar energy, every altitude change, every frequency shift. The closer the aircraft come, the more clearly their signatures resolve. Speed profiles, emissions, habits. The pressure is loud. The response is silence. At 2:39 p.m., the formation loosens. Not withdrawing, repositioning. The aircraft widen spacing and curve back into a broader pattern. They have made their point. They have pushed the line, and the line has not moved. The captain speaks again, low and even. Maintain course. Maintain posture. The bridge acknowledges. In CIC, the logging continues. The encounter is not over, but its shape is changing. This was never about open conflict. It was about finding out how far they could go without crossing the final threshold, and what would come back in return. What came back was discipline and time. At 2:40 p.m., the lead aircraft sweeps across the carrier's forward quarter once again. Not as low as before, but fast enough to disturb the air. The pressure wave ripples over the deck. A few loose straps snap taut. On the bridge, no one reacts. Below, the ship responds perfectly. Radar returns are cross-checked against passive detections. Timing between emissions is logged to the second. Patterns begin to emerge. How quickly the aircraft adjust with proximity, how often they change altitude, how they space themselves when left unchallenged. This is not guesswork. This is collection. At 2:41 p.m., the Russians tighten their circle. Not directly overhead, just far enough out to observe. Just close enough to remain inside the ship's awareness bubble. They are measuring reactions. They do not realize they are being measured as well. Bridge, CIC, continuing passive collection. No change in posture. The captain nods once. Restraint is intentional. Active radar would announce itself. Launching aircraft would raise the stakes. Silence keeps the advantage exactly where the ship wants it. At 2:42 p.m., one aircraft briefly switches modes. Search to track, then back again. A flicker so short it might be missed by almost anyone else. Not here. Track mode spike logged, the electronic warfare officer says. Short duration. Another fingerprint added, another piece of the pattern. At this range, very little stays hidden. The Russian pilots likely feel in control. They have closed distance, forced attention, dominated the sky visually. What they have not forced is a reaction, and without that reaction, the exchange stays on American terms. At 2:43 p.m., the formation stretches out. One aircraft drifts wider as overwatch. The other two maintain pressure from separate angles. It is coordinated, practiced, which makes the data even more valuable. Every coordinated move reveals doctrine, training habits, leadership patterns, response timing. In CIC, analysts continue marking the timeline. No panic, no surprises. At 2:44 p.m., the ship's passive systems are full, not overloaded, simply rich with detail. The picture is clean now, coherent, complete. The Russians have shown far more than they intended. Radar behavior, thermal profile, spacing under pressure. All of it is being recorded, stored, and transmitted through secure channels far beyond the horizon. This is the real trap. Not steel, not force. Information. The captain leans slightly toward the officer of the deck. Continue logging, no change. Aye, sir. Above the deck, the aircraft continues circling. Still close, still loud, still confident. They believe the carrier is waiting them out. In reality, the carrier already has what it came for. At 2:45 p.m., the first subtle sign appears. A little more distance. A slight climb. Nothing dramatic, just enough to suggest the pressure phase is ending. The Russians have tested the boundary. They have made their point. What they do not know is that the exchange is no longer about presence. It is about what they have left behind. And they have left behind plenty. At 2:46 p.m., the third aircraft slips slightly out of plane with the others. Not retreating, reassessing. Its nose angles a few degrees off the carrier's axis. That is the tell. They are done measuring. Now they are checking the result. The ship does nothing. No turn, no acceleration, no launch. The flight deck remains calm, almost indifferent. The message does not need to be spoken. You did not move us. Inside CIC, the timeline is already being assembled in full. Maneuvers match to timestamps. Emissions aligned with behavior. Analysts do not guess, they compare. Passive collection complete, the electronic warfare officer says quietly. Pattern consistent. At 2:47 p.m., one of the Russian aircraft climbs again, this time cleanly and with purpose, leaving behind the low-altitude intimidation profile. The roar softens. The air settles. The flight deck crew notice immediately, not because they relax, but because the tension changes. The kind of shift that tells you the peak has passed. A final radio call goes out from the bridge, same phrasing, same measured tone. Russian military aircraft, you are approaching unsafe distance to a U.S. Navy warship. Recommend increasing separation. This time, there is not even dramatic silence. There is simply nothing. At 2:48 p.m., the formation begins to withdraw. Not quickly, not hurriedly. Just enough to place distance where there was none. Wings level, spacing widening, altitude increasing. In CIC, the range numbers tick upward. Contacts increasing distance. The captain exhales slowly, almost too subtly to notice. This is the part that matters. No clash, no escalation, just resolution. At 2:49 p.m., the airspace around the carrier begins to open again. The Russian aircraft remain visible on sensors, but their geometry is no longer aggressive. The pressure vector is gone. They made their pass. They got their look. Now they are leaving. Only then does the captain speak again. Maintain course. Maintain condition 3. The officer of the deck acknowledges. The ship remains exactly what it has been throughout. Composed, controlled, undisturbed. Below decks, the logs continue. Data streams are packaged and encrypted. Everything gathered over the last 20 minutes is already moving beyond the ship through secure networks to places that do not need spectacle to understand significance. At 2:50 p.m., the Russian aircraft turn farther away, noses pointed outward now, climbing steadily. The sound fades with distance. On the flight deck, a few crew members glance skyward one last time, then return to work. Jets remain secured. Operations continue. No announcement is made because none is needed. Nothing crossed into open violence. No weapons were activated, no fighters launched, no unnecessary alarms. And yet the balance changed. What began as a test of nerves ended as a quiet demonstration of control. The Russians came close enough to be seen, close enough to be felt, close enough to be measured. In doing so, they revealed more than they took. At 2:52 p.m., CIC confirms it. Contacts now on outbound vectors, no further approach expected. The captain nods once. That'll do. The ship continues on its original heading, cutting through open water exactly as before, unchanged in course by everything that just unfolded around it. To someone far away, it might look as though nothing happened. No dramatic footage, no public statement, no spectacular maneuver to replay. But inside the ship, everyone understands the truth. This was never about winning a confrontation. It was about proving that the confrontation was never theirs to control. And in that contest, the result is already clear. By 2:55 p.m., the last audible trace of the aircraft disappears completely. The wind returns to normal. The sea looks exactly as it did before. If you were not paying close attention, you might miss that anything happened at all. That is the point. There will be no press conference, no dramatic clip pushed to the public, no speech delivered to cameras. The ship does not need any of that. In modern naval operations, silence can be the loudest message of all. The Russian aircraft tested proximity. They tested reaction time. They tested composure. What they met was discipline. The carrier never maneuvered, never accelerated, never showed uncertainty. It held its line, not out of bravado, but because it had nothing to prove. Everything that mattered was already being recorded. At 2:58 p.m., the Combat Information Center finalizes the engagement log. The timeline is complete, from first contact to final separation. Every second accounted for. Event logged. CIC reports. The bridge acknowledges. The ship continues on its original course, steady and predictable, moving through open water with the same posture it held before the first radar return appeared. Its mission has not changed. But something else has. This encounter may never make headlines, yet it will live on in databases, training briefs, and future assessments. The next time these aircraft approach another ship somewhere else, someone will remember what was learned here. That is how this works. Not through spectacle, through memory. At 3:01 p.m., Condition 3 is eased. Stations stand down in sequence, not rushed, not casual, just complete. The carrier settles fully back into routine operations, its enormous systems humming beneath layers of steel, discipline, and procedure. Above, the sky is empty again. Below, the record remains. The encounter ended without fire or force. It ended with understanding. One side knowing exactly what it had shown, the other knowing exactly what it had gained. And that understanding will travel far beyond this stretch of ocean. Because in modern naval power, success is not always measured by what you destroy. Sometimes it is measured by what you allow to leave.